All right, we're excited to be joined by Seth Walder from ESPN. Seth, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
We've done various work together throughout the years, and always good to connect and have you on here. So we wanted to discuss this down 14, go for two idea that has become way more prevalent across both college and the NFL. Can you give us a little bit of the genesis of the concept and what the analytics folks have been pushing over these last few years?
Yeah, so the idea of it is that when you're down 14 points, let's say relatively late, call it beginning of fourth quarter, you score a touchdown, now you're down 8 points. The traditional idea would be you kick the extra point, you're down 7, you're down a touchdown, and then you can hopefully score another touchdown and tie the game. The idea of the basically down 8 gambit is you go for 2 on that first touchdown, and what that allows you to do is if you convert, then if you score again, you just kick an extra point and win the game. But if you fail, you have another opportunity to get back to it. So you can go for 2 again because you failed, and then you have an opportunity to still tie. When you do this, it tilts the win probability pretty significantly, assuming you're going to get that second score, right? The hardest part is scoring another touchdown, but if you're going to score another touchdown, then this really helps swing it. And it's a little bit like the numbers can be messy, but like if you just think of it like if you just assume a PAT is 100% and a 2-point conversion is 50%, I'm sure we're going to get into why it's not exactly that. But if you just assume that and you think, okay, PAT, we win the game 50% of the time. But if you think, okay, well, half the time when I go for 2, I just win right off the bat. And then half the time I fail, but half of that time I come back and tie it again, and I'll win some of those games. And once you think about that, it's like, oh, yeah, of course you're going to win some more when you go for 2 down 8. It's one of those things where it's totally counterintuitive. But generally, I've found that as soon as you sort of have like a 5-minute conversation with somebody and explain it, it's like, oh, yeah, of course. That does make sense. That's how it was for me. I remember when someone first brought this up to me, I guess 10 or 15 years ago, and I was like, wow, yeah, of course that's that way. And we've seen it take hold in the league, right? So many coaches now, it's almost the default at this point.
Yeah, and we'll get into the math in a minute. But yeah, the thing that I think makes it make sense or resonate to me is like if you are going to go for the win at some point, right? Like attempt a 2-point conversion to win the game in one of those 2 scores. If you work on the basis that you might not make one, if you don't make it and you've left it to the end, the game's done. You lose. Right, immediately. If you're going to miss one of the 2-point conversions, you need to know early so that you can have another. Like it's extremely improbable, but if you're going to have to score a third time, the earlier you know that information, the better. Like that feels like to me the reason why it makes the most sense. And obviously that is dependent slightly on the math because the alternative is always, well, what if we don't play to win the game in regulation? We just play for overtime.
Well, that's what I would say. I would push it a little farther than what you would say, because I would say that it's not what you said is correct, but it's also beneficial relative to the just play for overtime. You win more often, even if we consider overtime, we say it's a 50-50-ish proposition. You're just going to win more often if you do the down 8 than not.
Yeah, so that I think is the part that starts to get really interesting because we had one of these situations come up last week in the Thursday night game between Seattle and Arizona. And, we were in our watch-along set over here, and we were doing the standard thing, right? You're down for 2 scores, you go for the 2-point conversion right away, et cetera, et cetera. And we had somebody in our chat, I forget what his name was, but he was saying, look, the math has actually changed on that. And all of a sudden, if you are going strictly by the numbers are actually saying you are better off trying to just kick 2 extra points, play for overtime, and try and win it that way. I tweeted this out in response to somebody, and a couple of people jumped in and said, that's true. Like the math is changing. Josh Hermsmeyer, who people might be familiar with on social media, was saying, yeah, whoever said that is sharp. He's right. The math is changing. So what is your understanding on that at the moment? What do you see the math in that changing? And if so, what do you make of that?
So what I first say is firstly, I'm open to any argument, and if there's I'm all ears, and certainly it's worthwhile keeping an eye on the numbers and seeing how things change. From what I see, I don't see how that can be the case. So some numbers have changed. Like I think what they're getting at is that 2-point conversion rates have dropped.
Yes.
Kind of a lot. So if you go back since the start of last season, 2-point conversion attempts from the 2, so let's remove the 1-yard ones, have converted 41% of the time. That's down quite a bit from sort of the 48% historical average. And PATs have also crept up just a tiny bit. We used to be kind of in a 94-ish percent. We're closer to 96%. And so, yeah, there's a less of a disparity. I think that presents 3 questions. 1, has there been a real shift in 2-point conversion rates? 2, if so, by how much? And 3, is that enough to say that you should kick the PAT when you're down 8 points? On the first point, I would say, well, we don't know, firstly, but there has been no rule change. There's been no rule change or some major external factor that would make us think, hey, 2-point conversions are going to be harder now. Doesn't mean that that there hasn't been a change, but there's no like obvious thing. I think that when we look at, okay, over the last 2 years, it's 41%. If we just back it up one more year and we say since 2023, we're all the way back to 47% already, because in 2023, they hit 55% of the time. But then I still think that I try to think about this in like a Bayesian way. So every data point should be valuable. But to me, what I would say is it's very possible that some factor, some unknown factor, maybe defense is just better at defending this play, has brought down the 2-point conversion rate a little bit. I think that's totally within the cards. But my best guess would certainly be somewhere in between 41 and 47, and probably closer to 47 at this point. But even if it were 41, the question is, well, is that enough? And here's the real kicker. When we do a 2-point analysis or fourth down analysis, we show like the win probability added and lost, right? Everybody's familiar with that. But there's another key number in there, which we call the break-even number, which is what is the rate at which you convert the play in order to justify going for it. So what conversion rate do you need on the 2-point play to justify going for 2 in the down 8 spot? And we have it in the Arizona game on Thursday. We put that number at 34.3%. It's really low because the advantage is so severe in this case. You could quibble with that number if you think the PAT number is up slightly, but you can't get that far, 34 to 36%.
And that's,
so you just go ahead.
And that's going to factor in the Cardinals are underdogs there, right? And so they probably want more variance on 2 plays or 1 play rather than all of overtime, right? Because the basis of this is overtime's 50-50, but once you get into team strength, the lesser team theoretically doesn't want to go to overtime because they're more likely to lose. Is that all factored into that break-even point for Arizona there?
So it is partially in the sense that we do consider the relative team strength in going into the game. I think we do still have overtime as a 50-50 proposition. Now in that game, you wouldn't. I mean, they were close. That was like a short spread. I don't think you. I mean, overtime was probably 50.5, or something. It's once you get that late in the game, it's so close to 50-50. Even if we're talking about like a 6 or 7 point spread, it's very close. It's a fair point that you could nudge things a percentage point or 2 in one direction or the other. But no, I think we do still consider OT to be a true 50-50, which is, yes, slightly naive.
So what would send that break-even point as low as it was for that game if you say that overtime is effectively a 50-50 proposition and kicking 2 extra points, is theoretically such a slam dunk proposition?
Oh, so it really has very little to do with that game. It has to do with the whole gambit of being down 8 and going for 2. That's worth so much in a world where you score another touchdown that, you have to be really bad at converting 2-point conversions in order to not make it worth it. So it doesn't have that much to do with the Arizona game. I mean, the clock matters, like you said, the team strength going into the game matters. But by and large, you're going to see that number be between 34 or 36% in almost every game. And so what I'm saying is, even if, and I don't think it has, even if the 2-point conversion rate has dropped to 41% for our expected future 2-point conversion rates, it would still be a very clear go for 2 scenario based on our numbers, because it's so far away from the break even.
So I think that's still a tough one to wrap your head around, right? So because we all work in this neat, this is 50-50, that's 50-50. Okay, that makes sense. But you're saying it's like an uneven bet, right? Like hitting on the 2-point conversion, what that does for your win probability is so astronomical, it's okay that you only convert it a third of the time. But is that the right way to look at it? Or are we still looking at this kind of zero-sum game where you can only win or lose, and if you're only hitting it on it 33% of the time, you're putting yourself into the same level of disadvantage because you have to hit 2 of them just to get to overtime, right? Because then if you miss the first one, your loss probability goes up too, right? Your win probability goes up if you hit, but your probability of losing also goes up. And so are you trying to say, well, the win probability goes up at a higher rate than your loss probability, say, on the other end?
Yes, basically. Like, I would say your net win probability increases by the decision to go for 2. And I do think it's so interesting. And I am curious to hear what Josh, you mentioned him, does great work. So I'm curious to hear his thoughts. But it's funny because this decision is one where, and I've written this in the past, we talk a lot about game management decisions, and we can have strong opinions, but there's also a lot of gray area at times. And I think it's important to not be overconfident in some of the scenarios. There's a lot of unknowns. What I've always said previous to now is one of the beautiful things about the down 8 go for 2 situation is that it is black and white, clear as day. You can have the worst team in football, it doesn't matter, or the best team in football. You go for 2 when you're down 8, and it always helps you on average. And so, I mean, listen, like I said, I'm open to hearing any argument, but the numbers just don't get close, I think, to a place that I've seen where you could really justify kicking the PAT.
The other thing that I find interesting about the whole conversation is, so we've got on the one hand, like, what is the line that it needs to get to in terms of a decline in 2-point success rate for you to say, okay, now things are different. The other aspect of that is, how long do you need to see that before you say, okay, now it's time to start changing what we're thinking? And that I think is almost more, it's just as interesting, I think, as that part of it. Like, let's assume for a second that what everybody is talking about, this change of the math, is we've crossed some magic threshold that the data says it's gone from saying go for 2 every time in this situation to actually now it's saying play for overtime. How long would that need to be a thing before you were like, okay, if I'm in a team meeting room or if I'm in the booth, we are changing our approach here because the data says this? Because obviously we're dealing with sample size issues. We're dealing with, fluctuations in how these things go. Somebody might have called an idiot play and that changes the whole thing. Like, how much of a data set would you need before you're like, it's time we change our approach here?
That is such a crucial part of the question. And, like, truthfully, if it were me, that's when I would be like, okay, now we need a real Bayesian statistician to come in and do some bootstrapping and figure this out. You would need time, though, right? If we just from this point forward over the next 6 weeks, teams converted 2-point conversions at only a 1 in 3 shot, would we then think that the rest of the season would be a 1 in 3 shot to convert 2-point conversions? No, because we have a massive history of teams hitting at 48%, and we have even a short history of the last couple of years of them hitting at 41%, and there hasn't been some sort of substantive rule change or new strategy that I'm aware of that would indicate such a shift. It might, again, nudge us down, but we have to see quite a bit of evidence to get us to where 2-point conversions are dropping to 34% we would need to see a lot of change.
Because that's got to be where the real edge is in this stuff, right? Like, it's one thing to just be doing the kind of the mathematically most sound, like playing the percentages, right? Just doing what the numbers say is the most mathematically advantageous decision in every situation. But when everybody's doing that, all you're doing is staying level with the crowd. Like, the real edge is if you're first on something that's legitimately changed, now you're doing something better than everybody else in the NFL. So if there was a shift in this, that for whatever reason, absent of a rule change, like the league has just adapted and it's now better at defending 2-point plays. And, for the next 10 years, we're going to see this massive decline in 2-point conversion rate. Whoever's first on that is stealing, a march on the rest of the NFL. But the risk of that is, well, if you just jumped and it was a weird, weak point of data, like just a run of bad plays on 2-point conversions, well, now you're just making the bad decision relative to the rest of the NFL. Like, there's this fascinating world where you kind of have to be ahead of everyone else because you don't want to be late on it, but equally you don't want to jump too early and just be wrong.
What I love about what you said is, well, firstly, you're right. Yeah, you have to like do the analysis correctly, but it is so important, and this extends beyond what we're just talking about here. Just all of the advantages that you can gain from quantitative analysis or anything else is to, when you find an edge, and especially if it's contrarian, to seize it. I was talking to someone who worked in a front office for a team in a non-football, and they were saying how often they and the quote unquote traditionalists agreed like 90% of the time. And so they felt like, well, 90% of the time their recommendations get taken, but it's the 90% where they agree with the traditionalists. And they were saying, but the 10% is where all the value is. The 10% where we're doing something different than the rest of the league, the 10% where we're contrarian, that is where we gain ground. And so that's the most important 10%. And it's true. The first movers are the teams that gain advantages. There were teams that did this early, and you can hold this to any of those things, right? The same with fourth downs, right? We've moved as a league so dramatically, but there were teams that moved first, and they had a period of time where they had an advantage over the rest of the league because of that. And that's true with schematic changes, with the way you treat the draft or free agency, everything. Being willing to be contrarian, if it's backed by evidence, can yield positive results.
How much, what would need to happen in the running back world to move that? I mean, so like the overarching question is, how much new data is needed to come off these, to change the analysis? I mean, that's the crux of this question. Like, how much, again, 2-point conversions, this is one example, but if there's another axiom, so to speak, that the analytics community holds on to, is it a season of data? Is it 2 seasons of data? You mentioned rule changes. Obviously, if there's a complete rule change that, you throw out past data, like how far do you go back? How do you handle those types of changes and ebbs and flows?
Well, there's not like a hard answer here, but that's sort of the entire idea of trying to think like a Bayesian is you have this prior. Every new data point helps update your prior, and then you use that to come up with your new prediction. It's important to have a past belief. It's important to be able to move from it. And so there's no number, right? Like what could I say that would say, well, now running backs are the most valuable position. Yeah, I guess there's a world where that could happen. You would need some evidence, and how much, I don't know, but I'll say this. I do think it's important that we continue to look at new information, new data, and be willing to move off of those priors, because things do change. And I would be shocked if running backs became a premier position in the next few years, but you can't rule anything out. And unless you see evidence, and if you see evidence to suggest something, then it's worth looking into.
It's really interesting because we've all been watching football for long enough that, like, you don't have to go back that far for the game to be almost completely unrecognizable relative to what it is right now. So that somewhere in between there was a crossover period in, various things, right? But knowing where that line is, even in hindsight, is really difficult. Doing it live on the fly has to be even more crazy. So that I think is the real trickiness. Number one, figuring out where you think the line is in the first place. And then number two, actually trying to be confident that whatever situation has crossed that in the first place. But basically, to put a bow on it all, you're saying that based off the data we know right now, even if there's a significant drop in 2-point success rate, we are nowhere near the point where it's enough to make teams or to change that output. They should still be going for 2 at the first possible opportunity in these situations every time.
Correct. Unless I'm missing something, that's what I see in the numbers.
Last question. I had a coach at a game management panel at an undisclosed location, prominent coach, say, we were going to go for 2 in this particular famous situation. We were going to go for 2, and we had a great play. We had a great play. How would you even model a coach's
great play
confidence? Because if I had a coach who's like, because this is going to work 75% of the time. Well, that changes everything if I know I'm going to hit 75% of the time. Not just in this 2-point situation, in any 2-point situation. How do you model confidence from, say, a coach?
I love this. So I think you would need to probably work for a team. But if I did work for a team, something I would absolutely want to do is to have the coach give the whole list of plays, right? Okay, we're going to run all these, these are the plays in the game plan, and ask, what's your confidence of success on each of these plays? And maybe we break it down by, okay, if it's 1st and 10 or if it's different down and distance. And then we can after weeks of doing this, we could calibrate. Do they actually, when they believe that a play has a 70% chance of success, does it hit 70% of the time?
Right.
And it would be, either way would be amazing, to be honest with you. But if that were true, if the coach had that ability to correctly identify plays that had a 70% success rate, then
that's a weapon.
Then it could absolutely change the calculation. And it's funny because when we talk about 4th downs, with quick and dirty as you look at the win probability, but the real question is here's the break even. Do you think that you're higher or lower than that? And so if a coach can accurately assess their probability of success on any given play, then that becomes the real question. Hey, do you think you have a better than 35% chance to get this? Then you go. So
no one's
that would be
no.
That would be really
fun.
No what a fun project.
Yeah. I love it. Seth Walder, ESPN, tell everybody where they could find all your work and anything you're working on right now.
Yeah, just on ESPN.com. I'm on ESPN Bet Live on Wednesdays usually, and you can follow me on Blue Skies, where I post most of my analysis on social media.
All right, Seth, appreciate it, man. We'll do it again sometime.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.